or
Oh, yeah.
future? Okay, great.
And we're also live now.
We're
So
live. Woo!
yeah. So howdy all, this is Kyle Whittington. It's been a little bit since I've done anything. It's been a little crazy for the past couple of weeks. First, just kind of had a lull in things and work kind of got crazy. And then last week we had a stomach bug. And then it was a double header because we got hit by a stomach bug. And then we also got hit by a cold like immediately afterwards. So it's been quite the journey. But originally I was supposed to have Avellina on last week. But because of the illness, like we just rescheduled. So here we are. So Avellina, thanks for taking some time to come talk to us. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on board. This is exciting.
Yeah. So I guess let's just kind of start it at the beginning. We just want to get to know you a little bit. Imagine the audience is going to be people that know you from your work, and then some of the people on my channel who are hearing you about the first time.
So, my fans I've coerced to come and support me.
Enter the secret promo at the end of the video and we'll give you $3. So yeah, but anyway, we so just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your faith background a little bit. Just kind of walk us through that.
So I'm born and raised and currently a resident of Maryland. So the original Catholic colony, for those who know a little bit about Maryland history. It was the only one of the English colonies, the original 13 colonies, to be founded by Catholics, particularly mostly English Catholics, who were basically given this as a safe haven, basically by Queen Henrietta Maria, who was the Catholic wife of King Charles I of England, and she kind of persuaded him, among other factors playing into it, like Lord Baltimore and their whole family, into having this be a place where Catholics could come and worship freely because of all of the laws inhibiting Catholics in the British Isles. So I'm from there. I'm from the north of Maryland, so right near the Mason-Dixon line. I cross over into Pennsylvania all the time. Consider myself a borderlander as a result of that.
It's funny. Like a couple of guests ago, I had a guy who is from Pennsylvania, but on the Maryland border as well. So
okay.
You two probably live not too far from each other.
Probably a stone's throw away. It's like right down the street.
Yeah. So okay, so that's cool. So you from that in and of itself, like almost everything that you rattled off there about Maryland, I didn't know. I knew it was like the Catholic state, but I didn't know anything else. But I guess just to keep
my Anglophilia comes into play here.
Okay, cool. Well, that sounds like it could be a whole other like interview in and of itself. But let's talk about the role that like Catholicism played in your life growing up. So like are you a cradle Catholic? Walk us through some of that.
Yes, I'm a cradle Catholic. I'm majority Italian by ancestry, but also a mix of other factors and elements. Quite American in that, like French and Polish.
Italian?
Majority.
Yeah, no, that's a joke because your last name or your name is extremely Italian. So I was like,
yes.
What?
And my name is, and I've been told my face has the map of Italy on it. So. Nice. You can run, but you can't hide. And my
Very
hands cool. too. My hands talk for me. So.
Well, that's why we got the video going. So
yeah, there we go.
But yeah, okay. So Italian family, Italian Catholic. So I guess what was that like growing up?
So basically, as I said, it also have a mix of other factors as well, like French, Polish, a bit of Irish, English, Dutch, German. It's a blend on the so it's kind of I'm about, roughly speaking, about 3/4 Italian, 1/4 the rest of the globe into a concoction. But yeah, no. So I grew up in a very practicing Catholic family. I was surrounded by the faith pretty much from birth. So it's definitely something that has gone into like inherently the way I perceive the world and the way I perceive stories. It's kind of hard not to, like, from the time like I was a young child, I always remembered having a particular draw to the cross, to the dynamic of the Triduum, the crucifixion and the resurrection, that whole kind of eucatastrophe, as Tolkien would put it. So I feel like in many ways all of my stories and poems and things that I ultimately write kind of reflect that in some way. There's almost no way of getting away from it. I remember even as a quite small child, watching and rewatching Father Patrick Peyton's film The Redeemer, which I still watch every Good Friday. It's kind of a tradition. But it had an immense impact on me from very young childhood. And the way, again, that I sort of saw story arcs and everything else reflected through that lens.
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, I guess I'm not familiar with that film. Could you give us just like a brief rundown of that?
Well, it's basically a passion play. I mean, it's basically starts at Holy Thursday. I mean, I guess technically Spy Wednesday, because it starts with Judas Iscariot saying, I can going to the Sanhedrin saying, I can lead him to you. And then we get Holy Thursday, and it goes through the Passion. Most of it is dedicated to the Passion. And then ultimately leads up through to the resurrection, and it finishes with Thomas, putting his hand into Christ's side and finding faith that he is resurrected. So that is the overall. It is a traditional passion play put to film, essentially.
Okay, cool. Okay, so you mentioned that the Catholicism in the background, the eucatastrophe, is kind of like always been there. And has affected your writing, and we'll get into the story later. But like, I kind of picked that up in your book that I was reading last night as well, which was really cool. So how did you? I guess how'd you get into writing? Like, when did that start?
I mean, probably writing, as in putting the words on the paper. Probably around 9, but I've always been telling stories. I've always been doing that since pretty much as far back as I could remember, even with like my stuffed animals and things. Like I would have them go on adventures, and there would be a beginning, middle, and end, and a plot, and so forth. So pretty much from the beginning, I was creating stories with my toys always. So in that sense, I've pretty much been writing, for as long as I can remember. And then I got like my first journal, actually, where I could write stories in it when I was around 9. And then I started like freelancing when I was around 16. So it's track. And I'm 27 now for the arc.
Okay. Yeah. So we've got Les Poissons here in the chat saying that there you stand like a solo.
Okay.
No.
She's my girl.
Okay, cool. I was just like we have talking fish in the chat. Sorry. Anyway,
we write together. We are writing buddies. See, we're there for each other in time of need.
Okay, cool. Well, I was just like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, isn't Les Poissons French for the fish?
I have to ask her about that, actually.
Okay.
I'm not sure, because I know that her main interest is actually German language, because she's writing a series herself about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So we go, yes, no, very fascinating stuff. She's basically recasting the story in kind of an alternate universe that tells the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer for audiences who may not be familiar with it. So we're there for each other to read each other's scripts and keep each other focused or distract each other. We do both. But yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Okay. So, to get things back a little bit on the rails here. Okay. So it was actually quite endearing. You mentioned that like you were telling stories with your stuffed animals and the plots and stuff like that. I guess if it's not too embarrassing, like just could you give like a quick recap of like a story that you would have told about your stuffed animals? Or
oh geez, I mean, oftentimes they were going on some kind of quest, like some kind of escape from something. They were being held in captivity under a table, and they needed to go on a quest across a great river, which was the kitchen floor, in order to reach this land of freedom or something. But there were like
Okay.
all kinds of stories. That's just like oftentimes someone gets wounded and needs to be rescued by some daring feat or other.
That's that would be really cool. Like it's just like I'm just imagining one of my kids doing that. Like that would be really cool. So were your parents, was that just something that was just like, oh, that's just Avellina being,
Yeah, I think that they just accepted that was part and parcel of me growing up.
nice. Okay, so you said that you started freelancing at 16. So what is that? What exactly does that entail? Like, what does that mean? Because like I'm not a writer, so like I have no idea what any of
So
this entails.
yeah. So in the broad, what I mean is that I started to write regularly on a blog, which then opened up
Okay.
various opportunities for me to write for different publications, some paid and some not,
Okay.
online and print. So that's what I mean. So I've written at this point for about 30 different publications, over 30 at this point,
Oh
approximately.
wow.
So yeah.
Okay. Wow. So I guess what were some of the publications that you were writing for, and on what?
So I wrote for a magazine called The Wisdom Daily, and I basically wrote various spiritual reflections.
Okay.
I wrote for a number of Catholic websites like Catholic Insight, Catholic Lane. I wrote for the St. Austin Review blog that was running.
Okay.
Um, so, I wrote for Sci-Fi Fantasy Network, which was a website that used to basically put different commentaries on geek culture kind of thing. I wrote for Geeks Under Grace, which is another one that does that. So
Oh.
yeah, I've done history, been a guest on various history blogs because history is very important to me. So
Okay.
done a little bit of everything. I've written for the Latin Mass magazine. I've
Okay.
written for Seton magazine. So I've been around the horn.
Okay. All right. Cool. So the Latin Mass magazine. So that's kind of because I'm a Latin Mass goer. So we go to the
Oh,
Institute Oratory here in St. Louis.
very nice.
Uh, so like, and the reason why I'm asking, because I know Kevin is from around, like he's from near you or whatever. So I guess if you don't mind sharing where you go to Mass, I'm just curious to see if like you're from like the same community Kevin's from.
So, St. John's in Westminster is my main parish. We do hop around a little bit at
Gotcha.
times to local parishes around Maryland and Pennsylvania, but that is my home parish, St. John the Evangelist in Westminster, Maryland.
Okay. Cool. Cool. All right. So, all right. Yeah. Okay. So just to, I mean, I have no, yeah, it's kind of one of those things like I have no idea the name of Kevin's parish, so that might be it. I don't know, probably not though. But we have, you mentioned the role of history in your life. Do you remember like whenever that interest in history like started coming up, or like I guess, what was the draw there?
Well, again, sort of as long as I can remember, but I think it really took off around the same time as my love of all things British, which kind of generated around the time I was 5 or 6 through Robin Hood, which now it all can come together for you.
Okay, all right.
So my interest in that certainly picked up my interest in British, first English and then wider British history.
Okay,
And it just got me going down the path of different historical background and legends and myths and so forth connected to the British Isles. And then that branched out around when I was 7 or so. My interest in British stuff actually kind of came together with my interest in the American Revolution, which kind of crossed over the connection between Britain and her American colonies and colonial history and everything that tied into that. So,
okay.
and part of that was actually because of a series as well that sparked my interest when I was around 7 that was running called Liberty's Kids. Some people that grew up around the early 2000s will remember that show. And it's funny because I just rewatched it online a while ago, and it's funny when you're young, you don't see all the plot holes quite as much as you do when
Right.
you're older. But but really, I appreciate it for existing. That it got my interest going toward the American Revolution, and because my grandmother lived in Fort Lee, New Jersey, which has a lot of American Revolution, stuff all around it because of the
Mhm.
battles between Washington and the troops of Howe and Cornwallis and so forth. So that got me into history as well, and I became a big American Revolution buff as well, which is my current writing project. So yeah.
Okay. Well, could you tell us a little bit more about your current writing project then? Because all that sounds very fascinating. Obviously, don't give too much away, but yeah.
yeah, no, it's fine. So the current writing project is aimed at being a duology, so two books. It was supposed to be one, but it got long, so I split it in half. It's going to be better this way, I think. It's going to follow a Catholic recusant family from the north of England, and particularly the son of that family, Edmund, or people call him Ned in the story, and how he deals with the various restrictions under the penal laws in 18th century England, and his struggle to want to fit into his society and become a full part of his society, especially because he comes from a noble background. He comes from a high-ranking, used to be, family, but they've now fallen on very hard times because of their refusal to give up their Catholic faith. And so they really, by law, shouldn't even really have the land they're on, even though they're very limited in the land they now have. It's been cut and hacked down. They really shouldn't even technically have it, but the locals in the north of England often kind of looked the other way. They didn't want to cause too much trouble. So they're struggling. They're struggling, though, very monetarily, just leveled down, as it were, from where they were. And then after his father died, in comes to his life someone who his father had once lent money. And it is Colonel John Burgoyne, to be future General John Burgoyne of Saratoga fame, catastrophe. So it's a situation where he becomes close with this very colorful and dynamic, but also flawed character from history, and bonds with him, and then is being offered so many new opportunities through this connection, including the ability to, maybe go into the army, which is something he's kind of entertained since a young boy, kind of the romanticism behind, wearing the scarlet tunic and the bright, shiny buttons, and, very much a boyish understanding of the army, which is often a little idealistic to the reality. Right. And it's something that a Catholic can't do. So Catholics were limited in all kinds of ways. They couldn't be in the military. They couldn't be, take on a career in law or in politics or in various other things. They were very limited in what they could do. And they had to pay all these fines. That was what's making them economically kind of suppressed. They had to pay all these fines for attending Anglican service. And the wealthier families that were recusant would also often pay the fines of the poorer Catholics around them. It was kind of an understanding you took care of the Catholics in your vicinity. So all of this he has to deal with, and the fact that the people around him, his local community, are constantly kind of questioning him, especially when the war starts up, the American Revolution, when people are going off to serve king and country. He can't go, and the question is, are you a coward or are you a traitor? And you don't want to be either of those things. So the pressure on him to cave and take the Test Act, which is kind of a latter-day version of the Oath of Supremacy in many ways. Take the Test Act and become an officer in the army, and become acceptable in society. And this was something that it's based off of real history, the situation that faced quite a few recusant Catholics. I'm thinking of the Gage family, and this is real history. So General Thomas Gage, some history buffs will recognize the name, as he was the British general who was in charge of basically the opening of the American Revolution in Boston. He was stationed there and had troops stationed there, and he's the one who sent troops to go get the ammunition at Lexington and Concord and so forth. So his family used to be famously Catholic, famously staunchly recusant Catholic. For hundreds of years they wouldn't cave until his father did. And his father did so because they were going to take away his racing horses. They weren't allowed to have horses at this juncture. Now, again, this fluctuated depending on what magistrates would turn a blind eye. But if they wanted to enforce the letter of the law, they would say you can't have horses, you can't hunt, you can't have any weapons. You can't, possess guns and so forth. So they were very curtailed, and they knew, and part of this was actually just to make the nobles who were accustomed to this lifestyle suffer humiliation. And that they thought the humiliation will just make them cave and do this.
Right.
And it did. In majority of cases, it did. And the Gage family eventually did so. And so this story is somewhat based off of that, in that Ned eventually does cave, and he goes to the war. And so he experiences the American Revolution on the British side, on the staff of General John Burgoyne. But things happen to him in the course of this war. I'm not going to give away all of that.
Yeah.
But things happen to him which change him in a lot of different ways, and also make him cast a glance back to the faith he left behind, and kind of arrows up the spiritual origin of himself, and even his own name. He's very aware, and it's a common motif throughout the story, that he's named Edmund, that for the two Edmunds in particular, the two Edmunds being Edmund the Martyr, who was, an early saint who was killed by the Vikings, a king of Saxon England, who was executed by pagan Vikings. And then Edmund Campion, the great martyr of the Elizabethan persecution. So he's named after those two. And again, without giving away too much, I would say this story, All Ye Who Pass By, is the name of it overall. This story is sort of a retelling of the story of St. Edmund Campion in various ways, but set forward into the 18th century and dealing with a layman. Hit or miss, but generally. That's
pretty cool. So, wow. Okay. Yeah. Like, that's just one of those, like, okay. I guess my only question on that is when's the publication set for?
Well, oh my goodness. So I've been, it's in the process of the writing process, the hardcore writing process right now. Mm-hmm. So first the writing process has to happen, where you get a first draft. Then you have to edit it. And then you finally get it to the publication stage. So right now I'm in the hard writing process, the year. I'm in the process of trying to lay out a sort of skeleton formation of an outline of everything that's supposed to happen. And then try to, write it all out. And then it's a matter of filling it out. So it's step by step. It'll be step by step.
Yeah, no, it's kind of one of those things. Like, every time somebody asks me, like, "Hey, when's this big project that you're working on going to be done?" Usually my response is eventually.
Eventually, exactly. Que sera, whatever will be, and whenever it will be.
Yeah. Yep. Well, so that's cool. So I do want to talk a little bit about one of the projects that you've already completed, and that was the book that I tore through last night. I didn't read through all of it. Like, I gotta say, this is probably the interview that I've done the most work for, like, leading up to it. Yeah, because normally it's just like, hey, it's just a conversion story, or hey, I'm talking to somebody I disagree with. It's just whatever. It'll just be a natural conversation. But for you, it's just like, you need to read these books, and it's like, okay, fine. And a little bit.
I made you do your homework.
A little bit, like, I just perfectly honest, because honesty is so
work I did to produce it so that you could read it.
I know, but like, so for just being perfectly honest, I was a little annoyed, actually, because I was just like, great, I have to do homework. And the only reason I'm saying that now is because I'm going to admit that, like, I was wrong to be annoyed. Like,
now you know what it's like to have an Italian mom.
So but anyway, this story, The Telling of the Beads, which y'all check the links in the description. I've got a link to Avellina's Amazon store. If you like Robin Hood stories, like, this has so far probably been the favorite one that I've ever read. It's technically the only one that I've ever read, but I've watched a lot of movies. You've heard the story before.
That.
But this is probably my favorite, like, telling of the Robin Hood story. So I guess I'm going to stop talking now because I've got the author right here. So why don't you walk us through, like, the lead up?
You can feel free to give the premise. I'm actually interested in your
Oh boy.
Your
Well,
summary of it. Go for
so
it.
I may not be the best one for that because, obviously,
Your impression of the summary. I can always correct you. Your
cramming the night before. So a little bit like it was the character of Roger, who I kind of have no idea who he is in terms of like the Robin Hood story, because
yeah.
like, whenever you talk Robin Hood, guys, you got Robin Hood, you got Little John, you got Friar Tuck, the sheriff, and Prince John, and like those are, and then Marion. So
He's
like
in
those,
that group. He's one of those.
he is one of those. Okay, cool. So yeah, but it's just like who is this? It's one of those. It's one of those things, and just reading this and just reading his struggle and stuff like that, and obviously I haven't finished the story, but like it's one of those. I have no idea if this guy's going to be a hero or a villain, because really, like at this point in the story, it could go either way. You
Yeah.
know, I'm seeing lots of virtue here, but I'm also seeing a lot of vice, and
He's very much the gray character in the sense that he's gone through some terrible stuff. He comes
mhm,
from an extremely abusive and toxic family and home environment growing
yeah,
up. He's got lots of health issues, which people didn't really understand in that era, and which he's being relegated as a weakling.
yeah,
And he's struggling to find his place as a noble Norman in medieval English society, and it's very difficult for him, and he struggles to find God, which is sort of a big part of the religious element of the novel. Really comes in with
mhm,
Roger's struggle. So yeah, it's definitely something that he will struggle with, um, even more so,
mhm,
after various other tragedies occur to him in the course of the book.
yeah,
And I will say, book two is going to make his arc, it will reveal the trajectory of his arc in the
mhm,
traditional narrative.
yeah. So I guess let's kind of we've already established this is a Robin Hood story. To my knowledge, I don't know, and let me see if I get this right. My impression was that this was set in about the 13th century. Is that right?
This is about the 12th century. Now, keep
12th
keep in
century.
mind, Robin Hood stories vary immensely, like in terms of where they're
Mm-hmm.
where they're set, when they're set. I mean, it varies a lot. The legendarium is huge, and
Okay.
there's no one right way of doing it in that sense. That it's very, very broad. So like the original ballads do set it more or less in the 13th century, but then you do have elements of stories that were being taken from like the 11th century with regards to Hereward the Wake, who's mentioned in the novel. He was
Mm-hmm.
clearly something of an inspiration behind some of the later connectivity with Robin Hood and
Okay.
the concept of the Normans and the Saxons being at odds and stuff like that. Was
Mm.
derived from that time period. And I don't know if you got this far in the novel yet, but there will also be other references to Welsh variations of
Yeah.
Robin Hood, or figures of inspiration that will be put in. And so he's there was no one Robin Hood. He's an amalgamation of so many different figures, both outlaws and rebels, and so many different people, and then mythic figures like the Green Man, for example. There's a lot of that mythology stuff that made its way into the Robin Hood legends. But for practical purposes, my version went with the sort of traditional, most common version, which sets it in the 12th century, so that by the time Robin is an adult, it's going to coincide with the Third Crusade. So
Mm.
the idea is that he and his family, when you open the book, he's like a 5-year-old, he's a little kid. This is in a time when, you know, there is unrest with the Plantagenets in England. What's going to be mentioned is that there was rebellions of the king's sons against the king that basically wrecked Nottingham pretty badly, and there's all of this memory going on. But there's older memory back for like 100 years to the Norman conquest itself, which the descendants of that conquest are still living with its ramifications. With most of the nobility are descended from Normans, and the majority of the peasants are descended from Saxons, with some variation, but that's kind of the way it is. So you have a situation where the imbalance of power creates an also kind of ethnic ancestral divide.
Yeah. All right. So like all of that is absolutely fascinating. So I guess like back to the actual novel here. There were some one of my impressions of it. One of the things that I really enjoyed about it was that it kind of had this feel, and I'm sorry if this is going to come across as an insult. It kind of had like this feel of Game of Thrones, but like way better.
But not porn.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Clarifier there.
Yes, exactly. Because it was just like, I mean, like, okay, so obviously there's quite a few sex scenes, whatever, but like it's not graphic. It's because like, well, this character got married. So obviously this is gonna happen next. And at no point did I ever feel like it was bordering on, well, quite frankly, anything attractive or whatever, because it was just like the way it was described, it was just like, this sounds awful. But
what it is I approached it very much from a historical context, that this is what is, just to give clarification of what these scenes are. So it has to do a lot with Roger and his relationship with his wife Rosalinda, and their struggle really to get intimate with the pressure of having to conceive an heir. That was the big focus. And there was a lot of pressure on these teenagers who have never really, they've only met like the day before their wedding, and they don't really have, frankly, very good sex ed. So they're kind of going with this. They're trying to make it work, but they're really struggling. And I was trying to show that realistically, to have sympathy for the characters and show their arc throughout, but without being, too graphic about it. And that was important to me. And I think it was also important to me to show that they eventually do find that intimacy very slowly. It's not at all a love at first sight thing, but these two characters really do come to have empathy for each other, and they grow together, and they do eventually find that intimacy, both emotional and physical. But it's a long route to get there. So in some ways, I think they are kind of the heart of the story and the heartbreak of the story. But
not to give too much away, but
give too much away. But and so the other sequences you're talking about it have to do with, frankly, abuse. I mean, when you get down to and that is just basically me trying to be honest about the history again, and to show some of the injustices that lead to Robin Hood. I think a lot of the times we kind of have, Robin Hood is just there, but it's like, well, why is a folk hero so necessary kind of in this environment? It's because of the severe injustices that really go on with the abuse of power. And the abuse of power, inevitably results in, all types, including, taking advantage of women sexually, which let's face it goes on today. So it was something I really wanted to call attention to as a woman myself, and to show empathy for what women in the past have had to deal with and go through, as we've had with the character Orva, who shows up. I think you got that far right along the route. So no,
there was a few things, you mentioned like there's like they had non-existent sex ed, and like actually one thing that when you said that, it kind of clicked to me of like, oh, the only way that you could have had sex ed per se is by fornicating with a prostitute or
Yeah.
whatever. Like that would have
I
been
mean,
the
you would
only
have gotten some. I'm not saying you wouldn't have gotten some, depending on who you were. I think peasants would sometimes know more about it than nobles at some points because they were around
Mm,
animals a lot and stuff. They had a
okay.
general idea, and I wasn't trying to make like, I mean, Roger generally knows like something goes in something,
Right, right. I mean, he
not,
knows the
it's,
basic mechanics.
he knows the basic mechanics, but there's a lot more to it than that. And so
Right.
it's one of those things that they would have had to learn on the job. And so it was, and I mean, he's a good guy. As you say, Roger's basically a good guy, and he's trying not to, as you say, fornicate with prostitutes or anything.
Right.
He wants to be faithful to his wife. He doesn't really know what he's doing, um,
Mhm.
but he wants to be good. I think that's the thing that makes Roger so endearing. He genuinely wants to be good,
Yeah.
um, even though sometimes he has everything against him and he doesn't even feel the presence of God. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thought that was really profound. And then let's see here. There was something else that stood out to me. Oh, yeah, the awkwardness that Roger went through, like as a former young man, like
mhm.
I kind of like chuckled at those quite a few times because it's just like I was just kind of reading that and just going like, yep, been there. Like,
Yeah,
it's just like, yep,
yeah.
yep, been there. Like I don't know if you base that off of any experiences you've ever had, like if a guy's ever said something stupid to you, like it's just like I really hope you realize like how stupid that was.
I
Like
mean, I definitely have. I mean, Roger is definitely kind of an amalgamation of some guy friends I have. But I mean, beyond that, not just
right,
them, but a few of them have given inspiration. Not gonna lie. Um, but I mean, also just in general, I mean, he is sort of. I think he does come off as the most relatable character because of the fact that he can be clunky. So
right. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
we love him
So
though.
okay. Cool. So sounds like I hit the nail on the head on that one. Okay, cool. So and then the other thing was you mentioned Orva, and I'm not going to tell any what her relationship to any characters are, but
Mhm,
like whenever she was there was the prospect of possibly fornicating, and
mhm,
she said like, oh, don't worry, and a character was just like, no, I don't want to do that, I don't want to produce a bastard, whatever. And she's
mhm,
like, oh, well, there are herbs for that.
mhm,
I know so and so provides these herbs. And the this wasn't the first time I had heard that mentioned in like a medieval setting before, because
mhm.
my wife has talked about, I can't remember the name of the series, but like she really enjoyed it. And the main character had like a one night stand with somebody, and then like the author made sure that she noted that it's just like, oh, then the main character takes these herbs as a morning after pill,
Mhm,
just to make
mhm.
sure, whatever. So the fact that you mentioned that, and then like the character reasoned it out of going like, no, that's wrong, and just
Mhm.
using what he had like available to him at the time, the experience, like I thought that was really really cool. And I guess it was just really refreshing, because normally whenever you read contemporary books set in like medieval settings,
Mhm.
if faith is mentioned at all, if the church is mentioned at all, it's more like the boogeyman under the bed,
Yeah. Mhm.
and not like this. Honestly, like kind of like this background, like assumption
Yeah.
that's just like, if you are living in England at this time, you are Catholic. You
Yeah.
might be a bad Catholic, you might be a good Catholic, or anywhere in
Exactly.
between, but you are Catholic.
Everything
And
it was permeated. I think people forget just how permeated England was by its Catholic faith.
mhm,
We think now so automatically of England as, well, first Anglican, Protestant, and then like secular slash cultural Anglican now.
mhm,
And now even the cultural Anglican is dropping away now, which
yeah,
is almost sad, honestly.
yeah,
That there's like the whole groundwork system is falling apart. But anyway, in medieval England, there was a very, very strong and vibrant Catholicism undergirding everything,
Mm-hmm.
and every and you couldn't avoid that. You couldn't avoid being permeated by it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think all of the characters, hopefully in the story, come off as being affected in some way by the faith of their upbringing and their culture that is just permeating everything, and their morality is determined by it ultimately, and their
Mm-hmm.
understanding. I mean, this is something that is very important to me. I am pro-life. I am very
Mm-hmm.
pro-life, and I mean that in the broadest possible sense. That I try to always in my writing bring out the dignity of the human person. That is like
Yeah.
my fundamental goal in telling stories, is
Mm-hmm.
to reveal God in all things and God reflected in the human person. So it was important to me to address the issue of abortion,
Mm-hmm.
because in a way that I hope maybe will make people think about it from another angle,
Yeah.
because of the way in which it is introduced, but in a way that hopefully doesn't feel like pasted in. But
Yeah.
it's something that is organic to the situation,
Yeah.
and hopefully makes people really think about it, because
Yeah.
I think it's important to do that.
Yeah. And I thought it definitely did not feel ham-fisted in. It was just very natural. It was very relevant to the
Mhm.
story, and it was part of character development too.
Sure.
Um,
And that's kind of, yeah, and that's kind of I think what you're saying, yeah, with regards to similarities with Game of Thrones and the differences, is that I wanted to make a story that dealt with the harder stuff, with the
mhm,
harder elements of life, both
right.
in that time period, but I mean in this one too, it's kind of universal in some degrees,
Yeah.
but one that also was doing so in a manner that was tasteful and
Yeah.
therefore not Game of Thrones, and
Yeah.
doing so in a manner that always respected the human person. And that's why it's very important to me, because there are issues surrounding us, particularly or of a character, sexual
Mhm,
abuse.
right.
So it was very important to me not to turn it into a rape fantasy. So
Mhm,
I was very, very careful about the way I dealt with it on
right.
on pages. I was trying to get across the horror, but not even allow for any chance of there being titillation with it. I was
Right.
very mindful of it.
Yeah. No, I think you threaded that needle quite well. Just like from a man's point of view, like I'm
Mhm.
already naturally inclined to, in this over sexualized society, whatnot,
Yeah.
and like I think you threaded that needle quite nicely.
Mhm.
So like, yeah. By the way, once again, the link for the description of the book is going to be down in the description. But yeah. So the what do we have? Uh, yeah. So we were talking about the development of the character, which was fantastic. Oh, we were making the comparison to Game of Thrones. It's just like, well, it's kind of that same. Well, quite frankly, like I could read it easier than Game of Thrones. Like it actually wanted me to do that, and I guess it's also because like you're not writing from like a nihilistic point of view,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it actually it makes me want to keep turning the page. It made me want to keep like I'm actually invested in the character. It doesn't make me just go like life has no meaning. I don't, what's even the purpose? They're all going to die anyway. It doesn't
You're right.
matter.
This is something that is so. I honestly don't understand the point of Game of Thrones. Um, and I think that is the point. There is no point. There's no
Yeah.
point to Game of Thrones. It's supposed to be misery porn. Um,
Mm,
as a writer, I have read excerpts. Like I know I've watched excerpts of Game of Thrones, the series, and
yeah.
I've read excerpts of it, of the books, Song of Ice and Fire. I
Hmm.
know Martin's style, and it's porn. And
Yeah.
the reason I know this is because I have, as an editor, had to survive certain fan fictions that have been sent to me. And the reality is the dude is writing porn. Anyone who says otherwise clearly hasn't had the traumatizing experiences I have, having to kind of, deal with things that have been sent to me as an editor. So, the guy is writing porn. It's misery porn, even when he's not writing sexual porn. You see, people don't quite get this. There's a style to porn. So, for example, he writes a lot of extreme graphic violence.
Right.
And that is also porn. And he writes, sometimes just even the way he does the descriptions of anything just come off like a style of porn. And I'm just like, what he did essentially was do medieval. It's like War of the Roses, but with dragons, and it's basically porn. It's very unfortunate it became such a cultural, icon of it. I mean, I'm kind of actually hoping the terrible ending of Bran Muffin becoming king would make everyone just be like, wow, that was so stupid. And I mean, I think it has to a large extent, and had people sort of, blot it from their brain. So, I mean, I'm glad that it was so bad of an ending, actually, in that sense. I am hoping, because it's sad. There were actually good elements of Game of Thrones. I will say it flat out. There were good elements in the hands of a completely different person who wanted to take those elephants, wanted to take them.
He really wanted those elephants.
Oh, look at all the fonts and make Lord of the Rings out of it. Yeah. So if a actually mindful author wanted to take some of those elements and make something meaningful out of it and, not make it porn, he could have done so, or she could have done so. But that wasn't the case. So it's unfortunate. There were good elements to the thing, good world building, some good characterization, potential was there. Yeah, but it never came to any fruition. It just turned into misery porn. So, yeah.
Yeah. The there's a few things that that I have to think about that. Now, one of the things is, A Song of Ice and Fire. We're talking about it in the past tense, except for, the elephant in the room. It's not done, and it's not going to get done. He's going to die in the next 3 years. He's not going to finish the last 3 or 4 books it's going to take.
He made all his money. He made all his money. Why does he need to finish it? He's just glutted with wealth off of his porn. Why does he need to finish it?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think he cares about the art, because let's face it, it's not very artful to begin with. So it's not like I'm doing this because art. No, he's doing this because money and hamburgers. But
it's so funny. I think I might be wrong here, but I think it was Stephen King that was basically like, why did I write so much in my early years? Simply because I had to. It's just it was like, I write. It's like, did I want to, have a day off, or did I want to eat? It was just
exactly. And I feel for them, because I'm a broke freelancer. I get it. I understand the doing things you don't want to do sometimes because of different stuff. But it's one of those things where, if you have your dedication into a project, though, and you want to produce something that actually has some meaning and adds some goodness, truth, and beauty to the world, you're going to want to put out and try to, you're going to want to finish it for its own sake, whether it doesn't make you a red cent. I guess that's the point. I don't feel like that's the case with A Song of Ice and Fire. I just don't feel like the world will not be made even an atom's worth of a better place by its conclusion. And
obviously this is conjecture on my point. I probably shouldn't even be saying it, but here we go anyway. I strongly think that the reason why another contributing factor of why the series hasn't been ended yet is because he legitimately has no idea how to end it.
I totally agree. I think because he's written into too many walls. There was times when I thought, well, if he does this at this point, in the series, this could work out. Or if he does this could work out. But he keeps not doing any of those things to make anything work out. So
Yeah.
it's almost like, does he just want nothing to work out? And then I'm like, well, so why is the series still going? Like, it's like, just end it then, because like
Right.
nothing is going to come of it. It's this endless loop of misery porn. Because again,
Right.
porn doesn't have a plot. Let's be honest. It's just these little segments. It's a fantasy, these little
Right.
segments of things to rev you up, and then and then it's done. There's
Right.
not like a plot. It's not. It's not
Right.
high literature.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so okay, well, cool. We got the trash talk Game of Thrones, which was
There we
like
go. Hey,
cool.
that's always time well spent.
I've got expert testimony to say that my
Yeah,
opinions are valid. Excellent. Okay.
there you go.
So now in this this next part, I want to talk about this event that you've got going on at Oxford University.
So
So
Cambridge, hopefully in Cambridge, we're still
Cambridge.
hunting for venues.
Okay.
So basically, this is connected to the magazine that I run,
Okay.
Fellowship and Fairy Dust. To give a pitch on that. So Fellowship and Fairy Dust is basically a magazine that has the goal of inspiring faith and creativity and exploring the arts through a spiritual lens. So we deal in all different kinds of stuff: fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and the kind of broad tent of the liberal arts.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to do so through a spiritual lens. So we have, it's a Christian-based project, but we also have people from different religions as well who contribute. And, we basically come together to try to offer some type of a spiritual analysis of various different mediums and bring that out. We're trying to do something edifying. And we also have people of no faith as well, but they still are our guests and they come on and so forth. So we're very open, we're very welcoming, but we are trying to present something that shows the spiritual side of the arts. That we're here to say that people basically are created in the image and likeness of God. So we subcreate, like we take inspiration from the Inklings in a lot of ways, through Tolkien and Lewis and Chesterton and MacDonald, and how these Christian storytellers used this sense of like sacramental imagination to try to reveal God's presence in the world. And that is our main mission, our main goal as a magazine. So we ran in 2019 a literary conference, which was held at Oxford University.
Okay.
And it was dedicated to the legacy of Tolkien, because that was our sort of first off. So now what we're attempting to do is do a sequel conference, hopefully in Cambridge, which will deal with Eastern and Western spiritual storytelling traditions and motifs and archetypes. And it will mostly be a Christian-Muslim interfaith event, but also literary event. And this is important because Muslims make up pretty much the second largest block of people involved in FNF. They've been amazing. So we would love to do that. And really, I mean, the book, like with the Robin Hood book, for example, I've had an immense amount of help from one of my main editors on it, one of my main kind of skeletal ghost writers, Adil Ahmed, who's also writing a series that's dealing with also like the ideas of myth and superheroes, those genres tied into, though, kind of religion, like how religion deals with this. The idea is that the gods of old, right, the myth, like they are not really gods, they're super beings. But they're struggling, in this future reality, they make themselves manifest, and they're struggling to deal with the monotheistic faiths that believe in, the big G God, the transcendent, source of all reality, compared to these super beings who for a long time kept human beings in thrall through basically cunning and their powers. And so he has a very interesting story going on with that, and about how various characters, like one of his characters, is half myth and half human, and her mother was Christian, and she is trying, and her father though was a Greek god, quote unquote, and so she's trying to deal with this sort of split reality and find her spiritual moorings. And it's the same with another character he has who's Muslim, but he's super, like, he has superpowers. And so there's all these things that he's layered into his story. But anyway, so we help each other a ton. And he helped me massively with the Robin Hood series, because there's more books in the series, obviously. That was book 1. And in the series, also to give a plug, what's going to happen down the line is that there's going to be a very prominent Muslim character in the Robin Hood series that I'm writing, Al-Kashif. And his basic backstory is that he was captured during the Crusades by a mercenary band, essentially, and ends up in England and ends up being set up to be the one to capture Robin Hood, that if he does so, he will be freed. And all of this other stuff happens regarding him. So he becomes a very prominent and complex character in it. And so that's, how do I write him? I took it very seriously because I said, well, if I'm going to write a Muslim character, I don't want it to be what has been done to death, be super cheesy. Has been super cheesy inclusions of Muslim characters in plenty of Robin Hood things. I said, no, I really want to go to Muslims and I want to say, hey guys, I take very seriously, like, representing other people's faiths because I take seriously my own faith and the way that people represent it. So I really want to, your advice. And so I got it from Adil. My other friend, Adil Wolk, has been amazing helping me. He's ghost written some amazing Sufi stuff for this character. So had all of that. So I have a lot of different contacts from the magazine and from editing. So I came to this conclusion and said, we should do, as a start off of doing interfaith type conference, we should do a literary interfaith conference with, mainly Christians and Muslims because of the amount we have. And the different storytelling motifs that cross over. So for the conference, the idea is we were going to have like 4 tables with 4 sort of themes, broad themes, and then people at the tables will cover different specific topics and get a little chance to talk about those specific topics and then discuss them and have people ask questions and so forth. So the 4 overarching themes will be like divine and human love, and then like warfare and chivalry, codes and ethics and so forth, and then pilgrimage and journey, and then death and afterlife. So those are the 4 we've settled on. And, we'll talk about various stories and how they reveal something about our faith traditions and how they have sort of, just absolutely interlaced everything within our given cultures. Because, the dominant cultural religious force in the West is in Christianity, and the dominant cultural religious force in the East has been Islam for a long time. The 2 civilizations, as it were, the dominant anyway, and the 2, largest religions. So that I'm really looking forward to. But in order to make that happen, I mean, we could certainly use some extra cash. So at the moment, our goal is to earn another $2,000. So and every little bit helps. So, I mean, even, it's sort of $10, $15 in there really does build up. Enough people give to that, it's very helpful. There's the GoFundMe link is below this video. So if any of you feel inspired, to make this happen, and of course it will be videoed, so you'll be able to watch it after it happens. And we hope to also live stream it so that it will be like an event you guys can take part in. So if you would like to make that happen, if you like the sound of that sort of thing, every little $10, $15 or more, really does help.
Yeah, no, like, I suppose one of the criticisms that somebody would level is that, like, traditionally speaking, like, Islam is going to be like the biggest enemy of Christendom. So I guess what would,
honorable opponents.
Yeah. So, and I guess like a response that I would also have to that criticism is that, like, how many times have you had somebody come up to you and like reference the Da Vinci Code as like an argument against Catholicism? And it's just like,
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and it's just like it's not fun. It's not helpful either. Whenever like you're actually trying to engage somebody, except the only stories that you've heard from them are just ridiculous, just nonsense that somebody who had no idea what they were talking about. Yeah,
Caricatures,
exactly,
misrepresentations. hmm
exactly.
Which
So like,
happens a lot. Which happens a lot with regards to Islam.
yeah,
And the thing, yeah, and the thing is, I mean, I'm very straightforward, certainly in my writing, in
hmm
terms of like I don't like the way some interfaith efforts do
hmm
sort of turn into this very vanilla
yeah,
kind of thing. We're not acknowledging some very core differences we have, and that well, just sort of trying to be too politically correct about certain things.
right,
But at the same time, I think actually history, certainly for me, because I mean, I study a lot of Islamic history and a lot of,
mhm.
Eastern history because I'm kind of, in addition to being an Anglophile, I'm kind of an Arabophile. So I love the Arabic language. I love, history from that part of the world and the culture and everything else. So, another project, not to get the 20,000 project I've got going, oh my heavens, but I have a screenplay in
Mm,
process, in the back burner, whatnot, set in 7th century Iraq. And it deals with the grandson of Muhammad, Hussein ibn Ali. And one of the famous things about him was that he fought against the tyrant Yazid in the Battle of Karbala. And it's something that is commemorated, especially within Shia Islam. But it's also, I mean, Hussein is thought well of throughout the Islamic world. I mean, Sunnis also view him very
mhm.
highly. So the point being, it's a very fascinating story. It has a kind of an Alamo vibe to it, honestly. And I've come to really appreciate. I've read tons and tons of stuff, both about and by Hussein, because he was a poet and a writer himself, kind of a
Mhm.
warrior sage, and his father Ali as well. But you know, writing in these characters, the whole screenplay. I mean, almost everyone is Muslim, so you have to put on kind of a Muslim brain helmet, as it were,
Yeah,
in order to write these characters convincingly. And the same thing with the Muslim characters who show up in Robin Hood. You really have to kind of put yourself there and try to think like a Muslim and talk like a Muslim and put
yeah,
yourself in it, which I wish more people would do with Christianity.
mhm.
They don't. I take it seriously, and I think that the best way to do that. How they say, well, how do you manage to do that? Get to know Muslims, or
Right,
vice versa, get to know Christians. That's how you actually be honest and transparent with people and straight up and have integrity and be willing to, again, and yeah, be willing to argue at times and then get off of arguing and talk about Harry Potter. I mean, it's that's what life and that's what friendship is. I think sometimes there's an overemphasis on, yeah, sure, there is core differences in Muslim and Islamic belief and a lot of similarities. I'd say it was 50-50. There's a 50% groundwork of commonality and a 50% where we just diverge off the map. But the fact is, you're gonna argue sometimes about that, and you need to know how to do that and still be friends and get off of it and move on. You can do it and be friends. And uh, yeah, I mean, I think I've had at least one argument about the Trinity with almost all of my Muslim friends.
nice.
Probably more than one, but but we're friends. That's the thing. I think
Mm,
that's just something that fundamentally is important, and I think more people need to understand that people are friends, and not only just a sort of. I'm not even going for like a secular thing in spite of their religion. I think actually because of, in many ways, our religion, because
mhm.
you know we all believe in God, and we all believe that you know, we're put on the earth towards something that is part of God's plan and God's will.
Mhm.
And the fact of the matter is that the areas that we have in common often stand in stark contrast to secularism. We share a lot in regards to that, and the difference between our, for example, fundamental morality on a lot of different things. and what the secular world says. And that is our major source of commonality. So, there's that. I think that it's important that we remember that sometimes we always think of Islam as the greatest enemy of Christian. Well, frankly, oftentimes that's not the case. Oftentimes, especially in the West, it's frankly more the forces of secularism in many cases that are very, very different. I'm not saying, of course, secular, people who espouse secularism or, humanism, however they want to phrase it, are without morality. They oftentimes have very strong personal morality. But I am saying, certainly from a Christian perspective, that overall, when you take God out of the equation, the reason for morality is kind of gone, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yes, you can say, oh, I'm doing it because it makes me feel good. But why? There has to be some underlying transcendent reality, whether you call it God or you don't call it God, whatever, that makes something moral or that isn't moral. With pulling the plug on that, there's nothing to catch it. There's no safety net to catch it.
Yeah. No, I'm still kind of conflicted about everything, but especially the more secularism sets in, it seems like we discover more and more common ground with Muslims every single day. And I've got some memes that I'll share with you later, but they
have a cracking good sense of humor.
Yeah,
My experience
so I did a deployment to Afghanistan for 90 days, so it was not really a deployment, but I do have to say that the Afghan people are some of the most hospitable, friendly people that I've ever met in my life. One kind of a cool cultural thing about Afghans is that I think the underlying reasoning is that they don't do business with strangers. So before they'll sell something to you, they'll get to know you first. And it's just the idle chit chat before the transaction is not idle chit chat. It's absolutely necessary. And it's just
they're feeling you out to see if you can be trusted. And that's probably a very good rule of thumb in general.
Yeah. So, it's really funny because, whenever I was buying something at a bazaar, I can't even remember. It's probably some piece of junk, but I mean, special deal for only you, my friend. That kind of thing. It's a stereotype for a reason. It actually happened to me every single time. But it's just well, who, where are you from? Oh, I'm from here. Okay, well, how's your wife? I was like, I don't have a wife. I'm not married yet. And it's okay, well, how's your mother? And I don't know. It was just kind of cool because it was just I'm gonna get to know you.
It's more of a naturally sociable culture, in various parts of the Middle East. There's a tendency to. It's more sociable for various reasons. There's more hospitality. The hospitality tradition is very strong. Yeah. And I mean, for me, I think that I'm Italian. There's something kind of natural in that for me. I joked many times, I was joking to a friend of mine who's Syrian, and I was saying, we relate about hospitality and we relate about the fact that no one can pronounce our names or spell them. And so I always joke about that there, I feel like there is a lot in common, and we can be hard-headed. We can be very loving. We can be very angry. We can be jealous. We can be hard-headed. We can, there's a lot of cultural crossover for Mediterranean people. Yeah. So I kind of, and very religious, and then sometimes very irreligious. Can be very flippant. It kind of varies, and that's but there's a lot of passion. I think that's the underlying thing. There's a lot of passion and love of life and sociability. But yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Okay, so I got a couple of questions from Kevin that I've starred in the chat. I'm gonna go ahead and throw those up here. So Kevin's asking if you're familiar with any modern fantasy, meaning within 40 years. Wheel of Time, Stormlight Archive, Mistborn. It's am I a sinner if I say that I like these more than Lord of the Rings?
So, full disclosure, I'm not a huge fantasy buff. Historical fiction is my main thing. And in fact, that's the main thing I love about Tolkien, is that he laced in a lot of history stuff. And and history, myth, and religion is my main kind of thing, as opposed to the fantasy genre per se. So I haven't actually read any of those. I wouldn't be able to accurately comment. The only reason I was around Game of Thrones at all was because it also pulled off of history a lot. So it kind of had that sort of pseudo history, War of the Roses ripoff going for it. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to comment on those particularly, but don't let anyone tell you it's a sin not to like Lord of the Rings. Because if you don't like Lord of the Rings, you don't like Lord of the Rings. Nobody can force you to like something. And furthermore, I mean, I would be happy to critique various aspects of Lord of the Rings. So I'm not like...
Not on this show, you won't. No.
Lord of the Rings has many good aspects and aspects I feel like could have used a good, strong edit as an editor. I feel like if I were editing, I mean, there's sections of it where there is long monologues, which could be cut down quite a bit. Long descriptions, which could be cut down quite a bit. Some sections where honestly, it just feels like it just needs an edit. Like the basic premise, is fine, but and I say this as someone who's had to edit my own stuff gruelingly and had other people edit my own stuff gruelingly. Sometimes less is more. There's sometimes when, it's good to, from reading me, I go a bit slow. Like a lot of people say, Avellina writes slow. She drags you through like the slow motion of, the day-to-day in her writing. At the same time, I feel like Tolkien took that and sort of amplified it 20 times over sometimes in the slow motion he took. And I feel like that's because, I had the interesting experience of listening alternately to, on audiobook, Lord of the Rings and the Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T. Lawrence Arabia.
Yeah.
And you can tell there was some similarities to the travelogue that was very popular. So, people would go on a journey somewhere and then they would write their experiences in that journey. Tolkien basically did that for his fantasy world. And it was kind of common for some of those books in that style to be kind of long and drawn out. I personally, though, think, to be honest, that T.E. Lawrence had a bit of a better way of making even boring things interesting. Tolkien, not so much, in my opinion. And that's a kind of a writing style thing. So yeah, I'm happy to critique Lord of the Rings. The parts of Lord of the Rings, though, that make it so special are that it's obvious the man really did kind of do what I try to do. In the sense of it felt like his faith was imbued in everything. It just did, without pushing it. It was just imbued in it. And it's particularly moving to me knowing the history of English Catholicism, of everything they went through, to have someone who was an English Catholic make such an impact on culture that way, and be so firm in his faith, and really sharing the sense of hope, and that everything has a purpose in the end. That was really the beautiful part, and the Christological elements in Lord of the Rings really shine through. Especially with the servant-master relationship with Frodo and Sam, which a lot of people miss, that this was a very English class cultural relationship. A lot of people, they watch the movies and they just think, oh, they're friends or whatever. It's basically it's an officer and his manservant. That's kind of what it is. That's the relationship. But that's a beautiful relationship in its own right. It's really moving when you see it in that light. And the whole, element of the Christology is very, very evident in Lord of the Rings, the books, even more so than in the films. The films do a pretty good job, but even more so in the books is the Christology very apparent. And the whole element of the ring representing sin and its effects is very strong, without being, again, pushy or pasted in. It just, that achieved something and managed to give Tolkien the chance to create a mythology for England, in a sense. That was sort of what he was saying he wanted to do in some ways.
Yeah.
And you can tell by the way that he laced his Anglo-Saxon poetry into this. And I love the Anglo-Saxons, as you probably picked up from reading the book. Love the Anglo-Saxons. So you've got him lacing in these classic poems like The Wanderer and The Battle of Maldon, the latter of which is like one of my favorite ever poems. And it really is just, I mean, the section on Pelennor Fields is beautiful. Like I could listen to that over and over again, the battle description that he did, because it is so much like an Anglo-Saxon epic. So those are the reasons, I guess I would say that's why Tolkien is classic. It's the religion, it's the mythos, it's the sense of everything being enchanted or imbued with enchantment without spelling it out or spitting it out. And somehow God being present to history and myth at every turn, even when it's not spelled out. It's just, you feel it in the story. So he did that amazingly. So, so there's that.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Wow. There was a lot there. Okay. You know, yeah, it's just I'll just go ahead and move on to the next Kevin question here, because and if anybody else has any questions, like, feel free to post them up. Like, have you ever written an atheist or just non-religious character? One of my favorite authors, Brian Sanderson, is a devout Mormon, but he writes atheists very well.
I have, so in the eras that I work with, atheism was not in vogue. Like it's something like what you might have is a character. You wouldn't come out and say, I'm an atheist, and it just isn't a thing in this time period. But you have someone who, for example, questions the existence of God. Oftentimes, like, so two characters I'm going to highlight briefly. One is a character in the Robin Hood series named Harry. And actually, now I think about it, they're two very similar characters with variations. Because they're both, so one character is Harry, and the other character is James Blanding, Lieutenant James Blanding from my Revolutionary War series. So Harry's backstory is he's basically illegitimate. Mother was a prostitute, has no idea who his father is, grows up on the streets, has a very hard life, and becomes eventually like a poacher and outlaw. And he's the scruffy kind of guy who teaches Robin how to survive. Because Robin, when he does get outlawed, he's coming from, even though he's had it, he's not like a wussy. He knows, he grows up in the woods. He knows how to hunt. He knows how to function. Because I don't like this thing, and not to get on a tangent, I really don't like this thing where all noblemen just don't know what to do about anything. No, noblemen can be very well trained and very with it. It's not, so that just irks me. But at the same time, Harry can teach him certain things that Robin's background just doesn't have in it, because of his experience really roughing it. And that you can't always play by the rules. You can't play by rules in this new environment. And to survive, you have to rough it. You have to be scruffy. You have to do basically, what you have to do to survive. You have to break eggs to make an omelet, kind of thing. And that's what Harry is very trained in doing. He is the closest thing to an atheist that you're going to get in the story, but he would not describe himself as an atheist, really. He just he's just sort of like, if God exists, he doesn't care. That would be he doesn't care about me. He doesn't care about like stuff happening. If God exists, then why would he care about, this brothel bastard? He wouldn't, God wouldn't care. I'm on the fringes. It doesn't matter. God, if he is out there, and he's not baptized either. And in this culture, so he's just kind of like an unchristened. God doesn't know or care about somebody like me. Gotcha. If God exists. So it's almost more like, so that's the closest thing to an atheist, that he questions if God even exists. And if he exists, he doesn't care. Similar with Blanding, although he's had a little bit of better luck in the sense that he has a similar backstory, though, that his father was like kind of upper middle class who has an affair with some like 2-bit actress. And so he's illegitimate. But fortunately, after his mother dies rather tragically young, his father does kind of accept responsibility that is his kid and sort of partially raises and educates him. So he does get a leg up. He's a different position than Harry. So he gets a leg up. His father is in the military, and he gets Blanding a position in the military too. Although he's always struggling against this situation of himself being illegitimate. And we find out through the story, is basically what would be kind of called an atheist. That sort of, again, it's vague. But we have a conversation actually with one character who's more of a we find out later he's a bit more of a Christian than he lets on, but for all practical purpose, he's a stoical deist. And he essentially says to Blanding, well, don't go saying that around. It's just not in vogue to be an outright atheist. At least be a deist. And essentially the Blanding says back to him, I couldn't be a deist. If I was going to believe in God, I would be a full-on Christian, essentially. But so what happens is he sort of becomes this figure that actually reminds some of the deist characters and some of the stoical characters who sort of, because this was very in vogue in the 18th century. It was like they're nominally Anglican, but for all practical purposes, they're deists, which means you believe in God to some extent. It was better than atheism to this extent. You believe in God, more sensible, really. You believe in God. He created the world and destiny and stuff.
Right.
But overall, he doesn't actually involve himself personally in your life. He's not someone you talk to, that's for sure. It's not like that. It's like, yeah, out there, the creator, the maker, out there somewhere, doesn't really care about me. And this was so I was trying to show that reality, but the thing is that Blanding kind of stands in contrast a little bit, where he's sort of like, if I really got to the point of believing in God, I actually would almost feel like compelled to be very religious. I couldn't be this sort of in-between way, this sort of lukewarm way. I'd have to be all or nothing, which kind of has an impact on the person he's talking to, and later on his Christianity comes out a little more. But the same thing happens with Blanding, because various things happen to him that put him up against this, and sort of through other people he comes to reevaluate some of the conclusions he earlier drew. But those are my two closest to atheist characters, not full on, but they're closest to.
Okay. Well, cool. All right. Well, as we're winding down here, is there any topic that you wanted to touch on that we maybe didn't quite get to?
I have a poetry book that exists.
Well, and we've got, I've got your Amazon store linked in the description. So
yeah. So there's a poetry book called Pendragon's Shield that's also for sale. It's for sale in several different ways too. One of it is there's the color version, which is the most expensive, but it's pretty. And then there's the black and white, which is less expensive, and it's also print. And you can find both of them by just clicking on my name on the Amazon, and you will see the drop down and you can find it. And it's on Kindle. So
sweet.
You can enjoy that. It's basically a mix of religious and mythological and historical themed poetry. So a lot of the same stuff that, I lean into a lot.
Okay, fantastic. So all of that's in the description. Just a reminder, we've got the Cambridge event fundraiser going on. So, if you feel so inclined to donate, just even just a few dollars, I know every little bit helps. So, but anyway, other than that, this interview was fantastic. It went a little almost 30 minutes longer than what I had set aside for it. So. But no, this was fantastic.
Ahead of time I can talk now. Ask me things, I will tell all.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, Avellina, thank you so much for coming on, and for all of you who stuck around this long. Thanks for watching.